Thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Arnivan. When I was asked to speak at this event about human versus technology in customer experience, my first instinct was to just go into a 20-minute rant on how much I hate chatbots. But I thought instead maybe it would be more fun for everyone if I just told you about the time that I set out to make Japanese women happy. So a few years ago, I was working for a large financial institution, a large American insurer, and part of my role then was to teach design thinking and lean startup methodology to our employees across our Asian businesses. So our team would travel to a lot of different countries in the region and hold week-long workshops. So for 5 days, the participants in these workshops would learn some basics about design thinking, form groups, interview consumers, unearth consumer problems and come up with potential solutions. And then they would go out in the wild again, do some field research, iterate on their solution, and at the end of the week, give a final presentation that would be voted on by a number of judges. It's usually a pretty intense week. But it really helped the organization to not just teach people about this approach, this way of working and thinking about customers, products, and processes, but also to generate insights across the markets that we were in a very short period of time. And my job was then to take some of these ideas back to Singapore, where we were based, and develop them a bit further before making decisions about which ones to pursue or fund a little bit or build a proper solution for. And at one of these programs, a workshop that we held in Japan, the team came up with a really interesting problem. They uncovered this narrative of a busy Japanese salaryman. He's a guy who works at one of the big corporations, Toyota or any of the conglomerates there, slaving away at his corporate job. And he's at his desk all day, till late at night until his boss finally decides to leave and go home. And then it's okay for him to leave as well. He gets on his train, has a long train ride home to his apartment in the suburbs. And then he finally gets home and he's tired, he's hungry. And he ends up having an argument with his wife. He doesn't really understand why or how this happened. He doesn't understand why she's frustrated. He doesn't get that maybe the baby has been sick and she's extremely stressed and tired. He's just annoyed about having to deal with this after having spent the entire day at work. And at the same time, she's unhappy that he's not more considerate. He doesn't communicate. He doesn't understand her. And while this account of the story might sound very stereotypical or even a bit tongue-in-cheek, this story and this problem came up in a lot of conversations, a lot of research that this team had done, and it had, as a matter of fact, come up twice before in workshops that we've held in Japan. So this time we decided to encourage the team to actually go and pursue that. So it seemed like, based on these findings, that this might be a problem worth solving, or something to at least look at a little bit better. So the team did draw up a solution, and as often happens with these things, 9 out of 10 times, what a team like that comes up with is an app. Let's build an app for that. And sure enough, it was the same way this time around. And the problem statement that they wanted to solve was about making life easier for the husband, making it easier for him to empathize with his wife. And they thought that they could actually triangulate the wife's mood through a number of different things. So of course, there's social media, and they thought they could maybe, through the likes and dislikes and the posting behavior, maybe the content of the posts, or even just the fact the wife hadn't posted in a while, determine what state of mind she might be in. All right, so they wanted to triangulate the wife's mood, and they looked at things like social media. They looked at things like natural language processing for text messages. They looked at media consumption. So, if you listen to certain songs on Spotify, what does it say about your mood? Does that translate to things like Netflix, etc.? Health obviously plays into that equation as well. What can we do with data from wearables? And ultimately, things like IoT. So, can we tap into a smart baby monitor to figure out that the baby has been crying over lunch instead of taking a nap, and that your wife might be tired? And the overall idea was to, with that information, then generate suggestions for the husband. So tell the husband, hey, maybe it's a good idea to bring flowers home, or text your wife and tell her she doesn't have to make dinner. You'll just bring it on your way back from work, things like that. If you wanted to be mean about it, basically turn your wife into a Tamagotchi. And now you might be skeptical about the solution, and so was I, but I was very intrigued by the problem itself. So as I mentioned, at the time that we discovered this, that we came across this, I was traveling uh, a lot. So when our team went on these workshops, we would typically leave on a Sunday around noon, fly out to whatever country we were going to. Then during the week, we would be at the venue at 7 o'clock. We would, be on our feet all day, facilitating, having discussions, preparing for the next day. Then at night, um, we would just mingle with the local management team, or meet startups or potential business partners, obviously over dinner and drinks. So it was a really busy schedule. It was also very fun, but it was very time consuming, energy consuming, and just really it really needed my entire focus. It needed everybody's entire focus. So one of the things that I was not doing during that time was texting or communicating with my wife a lot. So my business trips did look nothing like this stock photo I have on the slide. Um, Obviously, my wife was not very happy with that, and she let me know that. So what I did was I came up with a very small and simple hack where I just set up 3 alarms on my cell phone. So every day I would have 3 alarms to remind me to text my wife, one in the morning, one at noon, and one later at night, either, like I said, text or make a short call. And it worked really, really well. So we talked a lot more, we connected a lot more. My wife was much happier about it, a lot less stressful for me, having an angry wife texting me on the side while I'm busy working. So it was all great until I told her that that is what I was doing. So I was very proud of my little life hack. Told her about it, and she did not think that I was some sort of genius. As a matter of fact, she was very disappointed that the increased amount of attention I had paid her was actually not genuine, but it was something mechanical. So hence my apprehension or my skepticism with the solution that this team had drawn up, but also in true to the mantra, falling in love with the problem, not with the solution, I decided to take this back to Singapore and develop it a little bit further. But before even thinking about the economics of any particular solution, we wanted to see how well it translated in a market other than Japan. How much does it translate to a more diverse place like Singapore? So we went out and described this solution to people to see what they thought. And first off, we started with married men. And to no one's surprise, men loved the idea. So every single man that we asked was willing to pay either a one-time fee for a download or sign up for a subscription, or at least so they claimed. And it was great. So it was high fives all around. Um, and of course, there was another party involved in this equation. So we did the same thing and went and interviewed a number of married women as well. And it turns out that while men love it, women really don't. Not not even a little bit, not at all. So I had anticipated concerns around privacy or some skepticism about technology and relationships like my own, but nothing like the visceral reactions that we saw in these interviews. So some of our interviews physically recoiled as we were describing the solution to them. And probably the one quote that is most memorable to me, it really is seared into my memory from those days, is the one on this slide. If I need an app to save my relationship, it's not worth saving. So this was a bit of a punch in the gut, really. And it felt at that point that maybe this project would end before it had really even started. But we had some more discussions internally, and ultimately I was encouraged to just, instead of throwing in the towel just yet, going back to Japan and digging a little bit deeper there. And the reason for this was simply that while it might not be applicable in other markets, Japan was the second largest market for that company globally. So even if it was only a solution for that location, it might still be worth it economically. So I was encouraged to go back, and I did that. And luckily for me, Japan is a very special place, and we got very, very different results. So when we replicated what we had done in Singapore and went to greater length than we had done in the workshop, we found that the results were different, and we saw very almost near equal levels of interest from married men and women, to the point where women were giving us suggestions as to what other data points we could pull into this to get even better estimations of their mood. We had feedback where women said they would buy this app for their husband if they forgot their birthday and things like that. So we felt pretty encouraged to take this and build a simple prototype and just experiment and see where we could go with this hypothetical app of ours that we by then were calling Happy Wife. Prototyping or test and learn, whatever you want to call it, really hinges on one thing: asking the right questions. So what you have to find out is what the most important assumptions are, and find a way to test them early, test them quickly, and ideally cheaply as well. So you want to figure out what are the key assumptions, meaning what are the things that you're least certain about, and what are the things that you may be certain about, but if you're wrong, they will really blow up in your face, and your entire model, your hypothesis, your whole idea will not work. So you want to figure out what those are and then really attack them very aggressively. And for Happy Wife, these questions were: will husbands actually follow the advice that we're going to give them? Because if they don't, then it's really a moot point, and the service would add zero value. The second one is: will wives, much like my own, discount their husband's actions because they're triggered or driven by technology? If that's the case, again, that will really hamper the value or perceived value on both sides of the equation for our users. And finally, maybe least importantly at that particular stage, is anyone willing to pay for it? So what we're looking for here was not really testing for pricing or anything like that. It was more around finding out, who is this really for? Who are we going to have to market this to? Is it the husbands or is it the wives? Is it a particular persona that is most receptive to this, and who is seeing the most monetary value in this? That's what it's about at that stage. So with that in mind, here's what we did. We recruited a number of couples in Tokyo, and then we gave the wives an onboarding questionnaire. That questionnaire was a very long list of very simple questions. So it was things like food and gift preferences. Do you like flowers? What's your favorite color? What do you want your husband to do when you're sick? Those types of things. But it was quite a few pages of that. And this was going to be the basis of the suggestions that we're going to give the husband. So the concept is really quite simple. We're just going to parrot back to the husband what the wife told us based on a particular situation. Just for fun, though, we also gave the husbands that very same questionnaire to see what they knew about their wives. And the result was, and we kind of wanted to see how low is the bar really. And luckily for us, and probably luckily for Japanese divorce lawyers, the bar is really, really low. So less than 30% was the average hit rate, basically. So the average husband in this trial, in this experiment, got about 30% of the questions in the questionnaire right. So we felt slightly sad, but also encouraged that we could add some value here with this. And then we provided the following service. We basically, armed with this information, provided, ironically, something similar to your pretend chatbot, where my Japanese colleague would text the wives in our program on a daily basis and ask them three very simple questions. She would ask them, how busy are you today? How healthy are you? And how happy are you? And the wives would then reply to this message with a rating on a very simple scale from 1 to 3, One being I'm not busy, or I'm not healthy, things like that. And if we saw a negative answer to any of those, we would just follow up. My colleague would text back and say something like, "I'm sorry to hear that you're not feeling healthy today. What's wrong?" And then the woman might reply, "Oh, I have lower back pain." In that case, we would text her back again later that day to see whether that was still the case. So, do you still have lower back pain? Yes, I do. And in that case, we would then just pull up the onboarding questionnaire and provide the husband with the appropriate suggestion for that particular scenario. And we just send him a text message and say, "Hey, do X, bring flowers, get dinner, whatever it was." And we ran this program for a number of weeks and then followed it up with a pretty intensive exit interview for each participant individually. And you remember that one of the key questions is, will men follow the recommendations? So we just straight up asked them, did you follow these? And imagine our horror when we got these results back. 30% said yes. So the very men who told us how much they loved our idea, were now saying that they didn't actually use the service. And what's more, they told us that it was a nice try, but they weren't really willing to pay for it because we're really only just reminding them of things they already knew about their wives. So to me, that was more than just disappointing. You be the judge whether this is a blatant lie or just delusion. But think back to the 30% success rate during onboarding. This doesn't seem to be the case, really. So we're reeling from this input from the men and moved on to interviewing the wives and wanted to see what they were saying. We asked them, among other things, did your husband behave differently? Did you perceive some sort of change in their behavior? And 60% of the wives told us, yes, we did. Which is great. It raises the question as to why they're such a different in answers, but that's maybe a discussion for another day. And the qualitative feedback was also great. Women were saying that their husbands were talking to them more after they came home from work, or just generally paying more attention. So we get really, really deep qualitative feedback about how this impacted their interactions with their husbands. So that was amazing. It's surprising on the men. Positively surprising on the women, but the core message of these interviews was a different one. It was that the value of our service was not what we thought it was. So the real value we provided, albeit unknowingly, was to give women in this experiment a prompt for self-reflection. So 80% of them, of the wives, enjoyed keeping track of how they were doing physically and emotionally. They started thinking about how they were doing, and they felt that alone already had a positive effect on them. So it's very different from where we started out. Honestly speaking, where we started out was, why don't we make men's lives easier? And we ended up with making busy relationships better. And we ended up doing that not by reading women's minds, but rather by giving them or helping them to reflect on their own well-being. So very different place that we ended up in, not what we expected at all, and a lot of surprising answers in terms of willingness to pay and things like that as well. The takeaway, I guess, or maybe one of many takeaways, is that customer experience doesn't always start or end with your product or your app, your service, whatever it may be. It might impact your customers more deeply and change how they experience other things as well. So it's a lot about perception and customer reaction to your product. So you need to consider how your solution really is perceived, and not just by your customer, but also by those around them. How is the fact that your user, your customer, uses your service, your product, your app, how does that change other people's perception of them potentially? It's also about how it might alter people's behavior outside of the product, right? How does it impact people downstream? How does it impact a wife, a spouse, a child, a customer? So your customer's customer, and how might they be interacting with your service in a way that you did not expect? I think companies are a lot more aware of that particular question. how are people using things. But if you don't really dig deep into that, there are a lot of things that you don't see when you're just watching people use your app. There's a lot of stuff that happens outside of that. So I would encourage all of you, if you're building a product, or you're trying to improve a product, or even just want to do a pulse check on how things are going and how much value you're really providing, is to take some time to think about what happens before and after people are in the actual experience that you're providing. So in other words, if you're talking in a sense of customer journey maps, for example, what actually happens after that last episode in your customer journey map? What happens after your customer has left your app? Right? Think about what else might be impacted through that. So while your particular product might not make or break a marriage, if you look at these things on the fringes and actually belong beyond the fringes of the experience that you provide, you might find a lot of things that surprise you and might give you a lot of impulses to do things better, or even just to go in a completely different direction and provide value in a very different way. I hope that this was helpful to you in some way, shape, or form, or that at least it was mildly entertaining. With that, I think we can move to Q&A, and feel free to ask me anything about this project with Happy Wife, or some of the other things I've done in Singapore. Feel free to ask me about why I hate chatbots, or really anything else. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Nico. That's a wonderful session, and also quite, the topic that you chose was also quite relevant and interesting, and in some ways funny and witty as well. Uh, that was really good. We do have a couple of questions. Let's see. Yeah. So can you see the question yourself, or
In the open questions.
yeah?
All right, perfect. Why do you hate chatbots? Thank you. So now you will get my 20-minute rant on chatbots, maybe longer. Now, it's really about chatbots today, and I think Jasper made some really good points about the different type of chatbots that you see out in the wild, right? A closed system and an open one. The closed one to me is really just an IVR put onto a web interface, right? So you're taking an experience, hotline, click number 5 for this service, click number 6 for this service. You're taking that and you're putting it, you're really just putting it in a delivery mechanism that's cheaper for you as a company, right? And you're expecting that people see that as some sort of innovation. That's not really what it is. I feel like there's this, there are very simple use cases and very complex use cases for finding information. That's what this is supposed to be. For the simple ones, you're most likely better off with a really well thought out knowledge base or FAQ than using an IVR type chatbot. And for the more complex ones, I think you very quickly get into the territory where you want a human to handle that interaction, simply because the AI, to Jasper's point, isn't there yet. The worst offenders, I feel like, are banks and insurers, my own industries, where you start off with a chatbot that's really simple and just really there for effect, and then you get handed off not to call center agents, but you get handed off to a live chat, which is very problematic in its own right, because it has all the downsides of calling a call center, plus the risk of timing out. You don't really have persistency or a real record of that, and I think it's just not there yet. I will say this though, before finishing my rant, I will say this: I've come across something over the last few years that I find very exciting and just a great customer experience. Messaging. So not live chat, but messaging, either in a native app by that provider, or simply through things like WhatsApp, because WhatsApp, it's changing a little bit now, but it's completely encrypted. I've opened an investment account in Singapore a few years ago, and I just filled out the form online, and then I was texted via WhatsApp by this provider through their official channel, uploaded my passport photo there. And I think for Europeans, which I am as well, for Europeans, that starts being a little bit scary. Asia is a little bit less reserved when it comes to things like that. But just the ability to have the entire history of the chat over several days, was great, and it flips the perception as well. We're in a live chat. If nothing happens for 2 minutes, you're angry, right? That's a long time, and you start getting distracted. You do something else. Maybe you close your browser window. You come back an hour later, and the thing is gone. On WhatsApp, you do have the history, and then there are other things in where providers do native app. I founded a company in Singapore, and the entire process and all my taxes and all that stuff is done within an app, and the entire interface is literally just a chat. So the entire experience is on there, and it sounds a bit scary at first, or sounds messy, but it's really not at all. It's an amazing experience. The answers come in within 20 minutes, which is better than shooting off an email or a form or whatever that you get answered 2 days later. So messaging, I think, is where it's at, and I think it's going to supersede, at the very least, live chat and maybe even chatbots. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
Yeah, excellent. The next question is from Maisa Sarkis. Hello, Nico. Great story. What worked well during the customer journey mapping?
What went well during the customer journey mapping? Oh, that's a good one. The journey was quite a short one. It was just a very quick cycle, and I think people appreciated just the simplicity of it. So I think the journey map wasn't really a challenge here. We had some issues around privacy as being a financial institution, so the delivery mechanism was a little bit. We had to find the right platform to talk to our customers with, but once we had that sorted out, it was actually exceeded our expectations in terms of how smooth it went. I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure whether you were looking for a particular piece.
Right. The next question is from Raghav. How long did it take to create this chatbot? What platform was it built on? Did it have integrations into e-commerce vendor platforms, Amazon,
Okay.
that opportunity? Yeah.
No to all of that. So it was all smoke and mirrors. The organization I was with, and that particular team, we were very big believers of things like mechanical Turks, and that's what this was. So we're literally just pretending, and probably poorly at that, to be a chatbot, but we weren't. We were just really trying to give that sense to people. But these integrations that you speak of, that was exactly what we were shooting for in the long run, right? And that would actually have been potentially a secondary monetization, or maybe even a primary monetization model, right? If we don't get people to subscribe to what we're doing, can we skim something off the top for an order of flowers and things like that? That was very much in the plan.
Excellent, excellent. And I think there are a couple of comments which you can read. One of them is, are you intending to keep the happy wife name? And the second one is, did you consider the option of not to tell the wives about using the app?
So the program, project has been killed. So this was 5 years ago almost, as it's been a long time since. We did not consider changing the name, but we did very much consider in the early days, and we asked some of the husbands about this, and also the wives, not telling the wives about it. But we very quickly came to the conclusion, actually from both sides of the relationship, that that's a really, really bad idea, starting off on basically a lie.
Right. And I think that's a great way of ending the session here. Thank you, Nico. Again, a very insightful and a fresh idea that you shared with us today. So, on behalf of Roundtable Insights and the audience, wish you all the best, and a round of applause from our side. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks again for having me.